Ready? Okay, so I figured this week would be an appropriate week to talk about the halachos of Gerus. Does anyone know why this would be an appropriate week?
Because Yisrael?
Oh, why?
I thought Yisrael was Jewish.
Oh, so that's one reason.
Does that mean Tapara?
One reason is...
Does that mean Tapara was not?
Tapara she was a Gerus, right? She was a Gerus.
I also noticed it says identifies Yisrael and Moshe's father-in-law at least 8 times. Count it up.
Yes, that's
once would be.
That's one good reason why it would be an appropriate week. There's a better reason.
Who is Yisrael's wife? That's a better question.
There's a better reason why
it doesn't say who his wife is.
Why would we talk about Gerus this week? More basic.
Kabbalas the Torah.
Kabbalas the Torah.
Read that. We come to this week's Seder. Kriya first Shavus.
So what happened at Kabbalas the Torah?
All converts were there.
All converts were there. That's true. Even more basic than that.
All Jews.
Even more basic than that.
All our neshamas.
What happened at Sinai?
It would have been our grave if we didn't accept
is that the entire Jewish nation underwent conversion.
Oh yeah.
And became the Jewish nation. Became Jews. The Gemara increases. Daf Tes learns out all of the halachas, all of the requirements of conversion from Sinai. Just takes out from each of the psukim what happened over there, and applies it to and says this is how we derive what a convert needs to do in order to become Jewish. Learned out straight from what happened there. So what did happen? What are the requirements? So there are really 4 requirements, and a 5th backdrop. The 4 requirements are number 1, Milah. All of Klal Yisrael underwent a Milah. All of this is learned out from Psukim, by the way. The Gemara brings a pasuk for each one of these things. The second thing is Tevilah. Milah is obviously for men. Women are exempt from that. Men, then the rest of them are for everyone. Tevilah is the second one. Immersion in a mikvah. Gemara learns out that the whole Klal Yisrael underwent immersion in a kosher mikvah. The third is Kabbalas all mitzvos.
Isn't there also in the times of Beis HaMikdash, wasn't there some korban that
I'll get to that in a minute. The
Kabbalas that doesn't apply.
The Kabbalas so I'll get to the korban in a minute. The Kabbalas all mitzvos is actually not discussed in the Gemara increases, interestingly, and is not learned out from any psukim or even really discussed in that Gemara. It's implied in the Gemara in Yevamos, and we'll try to talk more about Kabbalas all mitzvos and why it is left out. And a 4th requirement, which is the 3rd requirement the Gemara increases tells us, is what Chaim just referred to as this korban. Korban ola, without going into the deep details of the korban, is a korban that must be brought by every ger who comes to anyone who comes to convert. That is a requirement, that korban. What are the ramifications of not bringing that korban at the time of the Beis HaMikdash? That's machlokas in the Gemara, debate in the Gemara. Is it that yields that the ger is asur in kachim, in achilas kachim? It's prohibited to eat sacrificial foods or holy foods, or is it something more than that? That they are asur level b'kal, that they remain prohibited to marry into the Jewish people until the korban is brought. Now the Gemara over there asks the basic question that maybe we're all thinking, which is that nowadays we don't have korbanos. So the Gemara asks, would you say that so nowadays should we not accept converts because we don't have korbanos anymore? So the Gemara brings a pasuk and that the Torah uses the word in the context of Gerus, lidoro seichem, for generations. Chazal understand from that pasuk that the institution of conversion that the Torah teaches us is something that must exist for all of generations. And it's coming to teach that even if there's something that will be missing, such as the korban, that will only be a requirement and only be an equal, make an issue at the time where it can be brought, when the Beis HaMikdash was in place. Now the Beis HaMikdash is not in place, the requirement to bring the korban is not in place, and therefore the convert can become a full-fledged convert even without bringing the korban. However, and that's all clear. However, what's interesting to note is the Gemara says that, of course, when the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt, then all the converts will go and bring that korban. Because at that point they will then become enabled to bring the korban. And at that point everyone will. The Gemara has a discussion, should they already put aside money to buy that korban for when the Beis HaMikdash will come, and there's a debate about it in the Gemara. The Gemara concludes that they should not do that. It's not a good idea to put aside money that's set for hektish, to make any money sanctified and have to store it. We have many different halachas throughout the Talmud that could always lead to what the Gemara calls takala, could lead to issues of that money. So they don't need to set aside any money. But when the time will come, then they will bring their korban olah. Now, the fifth, I would say, requisite, it's a different category than the other four that were mentioned, is the idea of a bezdin. A bezdin plays a crucial role. The Gemara in Yevamos says that because the Torah uses the word mishpat, which is a reference to the requirement of bezdin, therefore the entire process of Gerus is done through a bezdin. Now, technically, when we're talking about a biblical requirement of a bezdin, usually what that means is what's called smuchen, mumchen or smuchen. Smuchen means that they got smicha. So real smicha, well, I guess we'll call it Talmudic smicha, not what we colloquially call smicha, but Talmudic smicha is direct chain from Moshe Rabbeinu going down. Ish mipi ish ad Moshe Rabbeinu. And that ended a very long time ago. Already the Talmud talks about not times where they didn't have smuchen anymore, and they were not able to do a lot of the different things that a bezdin of smuchen is able to do, such as dan dine knasus, laws of penalties, things, many different halachas that require what's called smuchen. So the question is, when it comes to a gerus, the Torah seems to be saying that we need a bezdin. For that reason it says we need dayanim. For that reason it says that it must be during the day. The conversion must be during the day because it's a mishpat, because it's an act of bezdin, and all acts of bezdin must be done during the day, as the Gemara derives. And therefore it may not be done on Shabbos and Yontif. Bezdin doesn't act on Shabbos and Yontif. So the question is, and this is a question that the Rishonim already were bothered with, how do you do a gerus after there are no more smuchen, after there are no more dayanim, which are in that Masorah, in that tradition, have the smicha, ish mi pi ish, one rabbi to disciple, etc., or disciple to rabbi, going up until Moshe Rabbeinu. So there are two basic approaches to this in the Rishonim. One idea is the concept of shlichusayu. Shlichusayu literally means that they're working as agents. In a broader context, it means they're working as agents of the previous bezdin, of the earlier courts, which had the dayanim, which were smuchen. Now, Gemara brings in this concept in multiple places to explain how certain things were able to be done. Certain acts of bezdin were able to be done after the after the line of smuchen had already ended. And the Gemara says, so these Rishonim say, maybe what's going on over here is that it's shlichus hayu. Maybe basically, it's a very complicated concept and it's hard to understand exactly what it's saying, but the basic idea is that maybe the Bezdin, which still did contain the koach of smicha, still was in that line of smuchen, empowered the later batei dinim, the later courts, the later dayanim, the later judges, who were the most, who were the qualified of their time, to perform as their agents. Now, this is not a literal shlichus, like the same way that other types of shlichus works in halacha, but it's that type of a concept that it's an extension. It was an empowerment from one to the other. So maybe the earlier Bezdin empowered the later Batei Dinim to do what's called shlichus hayu. So that's an approach that's suggested by some Rishonim, including the Ramban. And the issue that many have with it, and the Ramban is not sure about it, is that shlichus hayu may only be a derabanan diga concept. It may only be rabbinic. And if the whole idea is rabbinic, that's not going to give them a good answer for this question, how we can do conversion bisman hazeh. Because we understand that our conversion is not just a rabbinic conversion; it is a full-fledged biblical conversion. Imagine if we would think that if we would consider a rabbinic conversion, that would mean that on a biblical level, the convert is really not Jewish, and only on a rabbinic level are they Jewish. Which, how would that permit them to marry someone who's biblically Jewish? So the Rishonim would never consider such a possibility. We see clearly that the conversion, we see from the Talmud clearly that the conversion process works even after there is no more smuchen on a biblical level. So, in question of whether the concept of shlichus hayu is biblical or not, if it is not, then there must be a different answer. So the Ramban, and this is the more popular answer in the Rishonim, says as follows. Just as the Gemara in Krisis tells us, what are we going to do nowadays that they don't have a korban? Nowadays that they can't bring a korban, they can't bring a sacrifice. The Gemara tells us that the pasuk of L'Dorosechem, the pasuk, the verse that says that the institution of Gerus will apply for generations, and that teaches us that the korban is, so to speak, is a requirement which is on pause until the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt. Says the Rishonim, the Ramban and the Rashba and others, that so too over here. That teaches us that there is no requirement of smuchen by Gerus. That teaches that there must not be a requirement of smuchen, because if the Torah is telling us explicitly that the institution of conversion on a biblical level will always apply, and if you tell me that smuchen doesn't apply, so then the Torah must be put one and one together. The Torah is telling us that it must be that the requirement of smuchen either ceases to exist once there is no smuchen, or was never a requirement in the first place on a biblical level. One of the two. Bottom line is that we can perform. It's very clear that we can perform conversion on a biblical level, and the dayanim work. However, of course, this discussion has ramifications on the dayanim, right? That the dayanim should be the qualified ones of the generation. Now, for sure, if you understand, like the Ramban, that shlichus hayu is a biblical concept, that it's really an agent of the earlier Bezdin, then for sure there should be great discrepancy and discrimination who the dayanim are. Even if you go like the other approach, is practically these are complicated halachas, and it has bearing on requiring expert dayanim. Now we'll talk more about the dayanim as we go through each of the processes. So we mentioned Milah, I actually, before Milah, let's talk about what the Beis Din's response is to the person who comes and says that they would like to convert. So the Gemara tells us that the first thing that the Beis Din says is, what did you see that you should do this? That you should come and convert to Judaism? Is this, do you know what you're getting yourself into? And it's a very long sif in Shulchan Aruch. One of the longest I've seen. I don't know if it's the longest, but it's a very, very long kind of a script that the Dayanim go through. Don't you know that the Jewish people suffer so much, that they are a downtrodden nation? And they see what his response is said, and he says, yes, I know that, and I want that. It's a privilege for me to become a Jew. So they go forward, they teach him some of the halachos and some of the fundamental core values of Judaism. And that the Shulchan Aruch says the core values, they're marichin even more. They spend even more time on, even more focus on. And they go through some of the mitzvahs. They can't go through everything, but they go through some of the mitzvahs and go through them. And then they talk about the ramifications again. And they say, do you realize that before you would become Jewish, you could eat, all types of non-kosher foods, and you don't get any punishment for it. You could eat chaylev, not forbidden fats, and you don't get any punishment. And now you become Jewish, and you'll get kares, you'll get the excision from this world and the next. Do you realize that before you became Jewish, you were allowed to desecrate Shabbos, and you would get no punishment for that whatsoever? And now that if you become Jewish, if you violate Shabbos, and you'll be liable to the death penalty, and etc. The Gemara, the Shulchan Aruch says we don't take it too far. We keep it at the Beis Din has to strike a certain balance, and the point of all of this, as the Gemara tells us, as the Talmud tells us, is that it's extremely important that we need to verify that the convert is sincere. We need to. It's the job of the Beis Din to confirm, clarify, investigate, make it clear, get a clarity that this person is really sincere and really sincerely wants to become Jewish. Because the Gemara says that we know that throughout history, and this is something we have in these parshias with the Erev Rav, and there's many other times throughout history where we have severe things that happened through insincere conversions. And because of that, the Beis Din has a very specific process to investigate and clarify, and that's their first step to make sure that the convert is ready for conversion. It's also because of this that we have halacha that's brought at the end of the siman about making sure that there is no ulterior motive. So the Gemara talks about conversions that happen because of marriage, or because of money, or because of different ulterior motives that were circumstantial for that individual. So if the Beis Din discovers that there's really an ulterior motive over here, then the Talmud tells us that the Beis Din is not allowed to accept that person as a convert. Now, after the fact, it should be noted that after the fact, if that happened, either the Beis Din didn't discover it, or there was some corruption involved, it's not so clear. It's possible for a Gerus to still take effect. It's possible for a person to have an ulterior motive and at the same time go through a Gerus which really took effect. And they really were makabel the mitzvos. They agreed to keep the mitzvahs. They really got a Milah. They really got a Tevilah. They really had a Beis Din. Beis Din shouldn't have accepted them, but after the fact, it's possible for the conversion to take effect. So this is just a side note, just on a tangent. Whenever you have something that went wrong, and there's some question about whether it worked, one of the halachas was not fulfilled. It's always important to know what exactly it was. It's not so simple to quickly say that someone is not really Jewish or that their Gerus was not good, even if the people involved with it were not big experts. So obviously we need clarification in order to know for sure yes, but there's also ramifications to saying for sure no, and that's not something to be very presumptuous about. Next requirement is the Milah. So the Milah is a part of the Gerus process, and therefore when a convert is coming to convert, they shouldn't get a circumcision before. It should be done specifically through a kosher moel, with a kosher Milah. There's a special bracha that said, etc. That's in lechatchila. However, obviously, many cases, maybe even most cases nowadays, circumcision is very popular, even amongst non-Jews. So a person is still able to convert, even though Milah is one of the essential processes of the conversion. If their circumcision was done already, they are still able to get they're still able to be Megai. Now there's a machlokes, there's debate about whether measures are needed to be done right now. What they would do is what's called hatafas dam bris. In English, people call it usually the prick or something like that. A small amount of blood is removed, and according to many, that comes in the place of the circumcision and fulfills that part of the gerus. There is some debate about it, and because of that, they don't make a bracha, they don't make a blessing on it. However, that is a strict requirement in such a case to do hatafas dam bris. And many converts have had this process of hatafas dam bris, and many also have a full-fledged Milah with a moel. Someone usually that's an expert in doing adult circumcisions. Now, another thing that comes up when it comes to Milah, I mean, I don't think this is fortunately this is not a very common situation, but it's an interesting case. Is what happens if a person has an injury in the place of the Milah, in which their makom hamilah, their place of circumcision, doesn't exist. They have an injury. So it was never removed, but there was an injury that does not that is not available. Again, not a common case, but an interesting case. Is that person able to do a conversion? They never did a circumcision. They're not able to do a circumcision. Are they able to convert? Circumcision is a requirement for a conversion. Is that person able to convert? So Shulchan Aruch rules that they are. It's a discussion in the Gemara and in the Rishon. The Shulchan Aruch rules that those people, that a person in such a situation is able to convert. They have the status of they're able to convert just as a woman. Just like a woman who is unable to, so to speak, perform circumcision, it's not on the table. So too, this person is able to do the conversion of a woman. He does the rest of the process, and he is able to convert. There's a much more tragic case, which is a much more controversial case, which is maybe, I don't know if it's more common or less common, but it has happened before in history, where you have a person who didn't get a circumcision, has a foreskin to get a circumcision on, however, has some type of a illness,
like hemophilia,
that if he would get a circumcision, he would die, or would be severely, his life would be in severe threat. So that is a much more complicated case and a highly debated case. Is such a person capable of becoming a ger? They have an arla, they have a place of circumcision. It's a technicality that they're not able to do it, but it exists. So that is a highly debated case. The next requirement is the Tevilah. The Tevilah is immersion in the Mikvah. Immersion in the Mikvah must be done with all the regular halachas, the same way that a woman would go to the mikvah nowadays for, it needs to be a kosher mikvah with all the high standards that mikvahs nowadays have. The process has to be done during the day, and there must not be any chatzitza, anything blocking on any part of their body between them and the water, similar to women who go to the mikvah nowadays. And both Milah and Tevilah, both the circumcision and the immersion, require the Beis Din to be there. The Beis Din must see the entire process. On both of these, if the Beis Din was not there, post facto, it's not so simple. It shouldn't be ruled out that the Gerus didn't work. It is possible they'll work b'diavad, and they'll require it afterwards, whatever it will be. But definitely in the regular way that it's done, in l'chachila world, it must be in front of the Beis Din. Now, this does pose a issue when it comes to the Tevilah of a woman, because the Beis Din obviously must be men, and the Tevilah by a woman has a technical difficulty. How is the Beis Din of men going to witness the immersion that is done by a lady? So this question was already raised, already in Tosis. So it's a long discussion and there are different answers to it. Practically, we require the Beis Din to see the immersion of a lady also, and there are different ways of doing it. In earlier times, like it's described in Shulchan Aruch, it says that they would have nashim, they would have women that would kind of do the initial part until she was, really all the way in the mikvah and covered, and all the Beis Din would see is just the top of just her head, just dunking in. They didn't need to witness anything, didn't need to see anything that they are not allowed to see. And nowadays, there's different ways that it's done. I've heard that there's some type of a cover with a hole in between that lays on the top of the water, and therefore the whole thing is kind of blocked off, and though the water is blocked off and just a hole that her head comes out of. There's other ways that it could be done. I'm not sure if there's one standard practice for it or not, but there's ways that it's done, and that's how we do it. That's how Shulchan Aruch rules that Tevilah the immersion must be witnessed by the Beis Din.
Is there a particular order that all these things have to be done?
So that's a very good point. Now we see that, so typically the way that it was done was that the Milah was, right, like it was done in our scene, it was the Milah and then the Tevilah. And that's the typical way that it is done. That's the way that it's required to be done. It must be first the Milah and then the Tevilah. There is a debate in the Rishonim, if the order was switched, would that still work? Practically, they're going to require it to be done again. So usually what happens is that the meal is done, and then there's some period of healing. That's already described in the Gemara, that there needs to be some period of healing before the Tevilah. And then afterwards, the Tevilah is done. The last thing, just to talk a little bit about some of the details is the Kabbalas all mitzvos requirement, the acceptance of the mitzvos. Now, it's interesting. The Gemara in Creases doesn't talk about this, doesn't learn it out from any pasuk, and the parameters of what a Kabbalas or Mitzvos is definitely the least clear out of any of the other parts of the Gerus. It's the most highly debated and the least talked about, least clear in the Talmud. There is a Gemara in Bechoros which says that if someone comes to convert and accepts the entirety of the Torah except for one mitzvah, then we don't accept them as Gerim. Which practically on a would be carried out if a person was coming to convert and said, I like this and that, but that halacha I don't feel that that's true, or I don't feel that that's the case. Then the Bezdin will not do a conversion, and the halacha dictates that they shouldn't. This is very unclear post facto what exactly what mindset of the convert would be considered a Kabbalas or Mitzvos. They wanted to be Jewish. They didn't know so much. They did know some things. They accepted everything. weren't planning on keeping everything. Didn't realize all the things they needed to keep. There's a lot of gray area. Practically, any good Bezdin is not going to convert a convert until they see that there's a real Kabbalah, a real commitment to the entirety of the Torah. But in cases where there was an acceptance of a convert where it was not exactly so clear, and the standards of the Bezdin were not so clear, and the mentality of the convert was not so clear exactly how committed and what exactly they would do, it is very unclear. Specifically, what really throws a wrench in the whole sugya and the whole topic of Kabbalas or Mitzvos is the famous sugya in Ksubas about ger katan, the conversion of a minor. Now, the reason why the conversion of a minor, the Gemara in Ksubas tells us explicitly, the halachas of it are very clear. The Gemara says that a conversion can take place on a minor. Their parents bring them to Bezdin, and the Bezdin can do the conversion. The Gemara describes the way the process works is zachin la'adam shalom b'fanav, that basically is dealing with the fact, the big question, which is that a minor doesn't have das. They don't have what the Gemara calls a halachic, what the halacha recognizes as the maturity and intelligence to make a decision that is binding. Therefore, their kinyanim are not kinyanim, their acquisitions are not acquisitions, and their marriage will not be marriage, and divorce, etc., etc. They don't have das, and their decisions are not legally binding. So it's hard to understand how it would work. The Gemara describes it through this process of Zachim Adam Shol B'fanav, which is a complicated concept in its own right. The basic principle is that something which is considered a clear merit is able to be done on behalf of a person even without their knowledge. So even though this minor does not, so to speak, does not have knowledge, now he's coming to us and telling us he wants to convert, or his parents are, or he's agreeing, or whatever it is, but the halacha doesn't recognize his knowledge, his das, as halachically binding. However, since this is considered, to become a Jew is considered a clear-cut merit, at least for this child who will be raised in that way. The Gemara distinguishes, the Gemara says someone who's already exposed and attached to a different lifestyle, such as an Eved, for them it's not necessarily a merit because they're so stuck in the ways of that are anti the way the Torah operates, that for them it would actually be too difficult. But for a regular minor, in this situation, his parents are coming or whatever it is, the Gemara says because that is a clear merit, you have this principle of Zachan L'Adam Shel B'Fanav, which is that a legal acquisition or a legal process can be done by others on behalf of this person, even without their knowledge. Now, the question is, there's seemingly no Kabbalas ol mitzvos. The Kabbalah of a minor, the acceptance of a minor in mitzvahs anyway would not be binding, even if they said it. And nevertheless, the Gemara tells us that it works. So that creates a whole question, how do we understand what Kabbalas ol mitzvos is? Is Kabbalas ol mitzvos just maybe a stipulation, but where it is not applicable, it is not a requirement? Is it something which is the essence of the Gerus? Is it something which can take place at a later point once the katan has das, once the katan has knowledge, once he becomes a gadol? A lot is written about this in the Rishonim and even more in the Achronim, how to understand, and there are many different approaches how to understand ger katan, and there are many different approaches how to understand Kabbalas ol mitzvos. What exactly the role of Kabbalas ol mitzvos is, what exactly the requirement of Kabbalas ol mitzvos is, and as far as I know, I really think that there's not actually one specific approach which is accepted, widely accepted as the approach in how to understand and how to define the parameters of Kabbalas ol mitzvos. Again, in the ideal conversion with an ideal bezdin, there's no questions. Everything is very, very clear. But in situations of post facto where it was done, where a conversion was done, and there is some question about the Kabbalas ol mitzvos, that raises a very serious question. Everyone is on board that if there is not a true acceptance to want to be a Jew, and the whole thing is just a joke, then or really for another thing, then it's not going to work. I remember a story. There was just to bring this out, there was a non-Jew who was living in Israel, and he went to a certain school, and his friends convinced him, that it makes sense for you to do a conversion. Now, this was already, he was in Israel at the time. His friends told him it makes sense for you to do a conversion. In Israel it's beneficial for you for this and this reason. You should become a Jew. And, nothing to do with being Jewish. Just they convinced him that, it's positive for you in whatever technical reasons it was. So he agreed, and he had no intention at all of practicing or anything like that, but he went through the process and took the test, and he passed, and was recognized by a certain bezdin in Eretz Yisrael as a Jew, and he went to school here in the States, and he asked a certain rabbi, a very, very big posek. He said, found himself in that person's institution, and he said, I never was. This is my story, and I still am not really interested in being Jewish. I just went through this because I had some benefits when I was in Israel, and my friends told me it'd be a good idea, and it was good for me when I was there. But I was never becoming Jewish, and I still have no interest in becoming Jewish and being Jewish. Do I have to worry? Do I have to worry that I'm Jewish? After all, the Bezdin pronounced me Jewish. And this Rav, who's a very big posik, said, no, you're 100% not Jewish. There's no question about it. You're free to go, you can go eat pork, and you go be Michal Shabbos. You're good to go. You're 100% not Jewish. Just to bring out this point that much everyone is in agreement that there has to be a sincere desire to become Jewish, and just the details of exactly what it is are complicated. I guess I'll just end with one last point about the minor who does a Gerus, which is not uncommon. You could have families that are coming and doing conversion, and the Gemara says that the minor has the ability to opt out when they become a gadol, when they become an adult. Gemara says they can do what's called a macha. They can say, I don't want this. And it will work, and retroactively, the conversion that was done will not be in effect, and they will not be Jewish. They have the ability to do that. The Gemara says, though, however, a separate Gemara that says that once they become a gadol, and they didn't do it, then they're locked in. Once they turn that age of a gadol and they didn't go back, they're locked in.
20? Age 20?
No, 12 and 13. 12 and 13, the age of bar mitzvah. Then at that age they're locked in, and everyone asked the question. So how are they supposed to do this protest? How are they supposed to say they want to opt out if the protest that they do before they're of age doesn't work because they're still a minor, right? And once they become an adult, at that point it's over. So there are two basic answers given to this question. One is that they start the process of protesting, of saying that they want to opt out while they're certainly still minors, and they continue that through till they are adults. And even though the protest doesn't work while they're a minor by itself, but it works to make it that once they become a gadol, once they become an adult, it will not be binding on them. The other answer that Rishonim give is that when they become an adult, when they become of age, that it becomes binding on them. That's only when they do some type of action, some type of Jewish action, a mitzvah or something which is confirming that they are going with what was done. Only at that point does it take effect. But if they don't do until they do something, until they do some act of yadus, some act of observance, it's not going to happen automatically, and therefore at that point they're able to make that decision. Nevertheless, our rabbis tell us, right, the basic question: if they're able to opt out, then how could you do the conversion on them and make a bracha? Maybe they're going to opt out. You made a bracha when they were 3 years old or 4 years old on their conversion. Their conversion, you never know until they become 12 or 13. Maybe it's not going to work. And the Rishonim tell us that there's a chazakah. There is a status quo, there is a presumption that we may make that is strong enough that allows us to make a bracha that a minor who is raised under in the proper Jewish home, with the proper raising that the Beis Din saw was appropriate to approve of their Gerus, we can assume that they are not going to want to back out. This is something which is good for them, and they are going to see this is something that they would like. And under all normal circumstances, we have the right to assume that. So much so, even though we are so careful about making extra brachas, making brachas which might be in vain, we don't have to worry about that. We can assume with certainty, enough certainty, that we can even make a bracha while the child is minor.